Hello, everyone. We are bringing you information on how to support dyslexic students in your classroom. And so I'm Laurie Weathersby. I'm the Bureau Director of the Office of Intervention Services at MDE. We have Jada Brantley with us today. She is our Academic Intervention Specialist, and Ginger Kessler. She is our Behavior Specialist at the department. We start all of our presentations with the vision and mission of the board, as well as our 6 strategic goals. We always just keep those in the forefront of our mind as we are doing our work at the agency. So in this session, we are going to talk to you about strategies at different grade levels for students, different strategies that you can do in different content areas, some hands-on materials, and some screener support. So first, starting with some strategies. Our preschool students, they are going to need a different level of support and different types of strategies. So for them, making personalized books can be a helpful tool. And what I mean by that is maybe pictures. So it can be pictures of the child doing different things, or it can be pictures from a family vacation. It could also be drawings that the child has done, and then taking that and giving them their own book that they have created. Increase their print awareness. And a lot of this takes place outside of the school. You know, a lot of these activities are things that we can encourage parents to do. So as you're going to the store, you know, and you pull up to Walmart, you know, and you say, "Where are we?" And have the child, you know, look and say, "Oh, we're at Walmart." Or, you know, you're driving by and you see McDonald's. Where are we going for lunch? And have them say McDonald's. So just having them aware of their print environment. And in the classroom, preschool teachers, you know, most of the time they do that naturally. You know, they have their letters up around the room, they have things labeled in the classroom. So any way that you can just increase that print awareness will help them. Choose rhyming books with high repetition of words. An activity that I always like to do with my students was read through a rhyming book one time, and then with the second reading, leave out the rhyme. So if you're doing a book like Hop on Pop, you would say the first part of the rhyme and then pause and let the student say the second rhyme, kind of fill in the blank. That's a fun way to get them involved in the book. Dramatically pause to allow students to fill in the refrain as you're reading, and that's the strategy I just mentioned. So as the kids are growing up, you know, some of these strategies will stay the same, but some of them will increase a little bit. So looking at our kindergarten and first grade students, breaking the task down for them into small pieces of information. If you give them a string of tasks, they may just hear the first thing you said or the last thing you said. So if you can give them that information one piece at a time, let them complete that task, and then give them their second step that they need to do. And that's not something that you would have to do, you know, for the whole school year, but they may need that at first until they build up that skill. Keep copying to a minimum for your students. That's not typically going to be something that you see in kindergarten, but as students go into first grade, you know, sometimes the teacher will say, "Okay, you know, look at the board and write down this sentence." So if you could provide that sentence for them already written, it will help them get their information, because a lot of times for our dyslexic students, they lose the information. So from the time they're looking at it from the board to the time they go to write it down, they have forgotten their letter that they were going to write or the word they were going to write. So anytime as a teacher you can provide a copy to them, that helps. Seating the students close to the teacher, that close proximity, helps them as well. It's kind of for the same reasons that we've already mentioned. You know, if you're having to break their task down into small pieces, you know, you're going to be working with them and you're going to be providing them additional support. So having them close to the teacher is always helpful. As you're reading books, you know, previewing the title, preview the pictures, talk about the chapter names to make predictions. As much conversation as you can have about a new book, it's going to help them as they're learning to read. So it's kind of that front loading that information before they dig into a book. And then connect new information to previously learned information. So if you watched our first session, we talked about that background knowledge and how a lot of times our students struggle to make connections. So sometimes we have to explicitly make that connection for them and give them that information so they can learn to do that on their own. So second grade through high school, we just kind of clump those together. And some strategies will increase as the students get older. But you see here, just encourage a daily routine to help develop the students' own self-reliance and responsibilities. So as they're coming into the classroom, having that routine that they know every day, these are my expectations. So set those expectations and teach them those responsibilities. Encourage good organizational skills. We talked about executive function on our other video. So as far as them building those skills, it's going to take time. So you may have to model that behavior for them at first until they can do it independently. Teach prefixes, suffixes, and root words to students to improve their spelling, decoding, and comprehension. And we can't forget about our students in high school. They may still struggle with this skill. They may not have mastered decoding words. So this may be something that you have to teach explicitly to them. They're still learning that strategy. So sometimes we take for granted that just because they're an older student that they are automatic readers, and that is not always the case. So another tool is provide audio recordings when available. That is a strategy that's always helpful for them. Okay, so now we're going to look at content area.
Okay, so there's a couple of things in the content area section that we touched on, but we'll talk a little more in depth about it. For example, in language arts, or really in any of our content areas, we can keep copying to a minimum. But for our older students, I think it's also really important to have conversations with those students about their ability to copy and take notes for long periods of time. I know from working with high school students who had dyslexia that they could begin, let's just say U.S. history. They could begin U.S. history taking notes, and they're moving right along, but they kind of reach that limit at a certain point where they just can't keep up anymore, and they're running behind, and that's just kind of their frustration level. So having good conversations with them about their abilities to keep up with note taking. Laurie talked about making predictions and really looking at a book prior to reading a book to have the student make those connections and get involved with the book. And we also talked about in a previous video about building background knowledge. So the more you can build background knowledge, the better, especially, as these guys get a little bit older and we're reading much more informational text, using timelines and visuals to make that connection with background information, videos to make that background connection is great as well. Okay, for language arts, encourage students to visualize that movie in the mind or mind movie while reading or while the teacher is reading aloud. And that's just good practice for every student. And truthfully, these strategies we're talking about are good practices for all of our students. Encourage students to read multiple readings of text, and because they struggle sometimes, and it takes a while to read. They're apprehensive to read multiple times. So having that conversation with them and encouraging them about how much it's going to help them and benefit to do multiple readings. So maybe take a shorter piece of text and do multiple readings of shorter pieces so they don't reach frustration level. Providing visuals. This is great for students from elementary through high school. You see this visual that we have on here. We can use storylines, story webs, story maps, but you can also use higher level versions of these organizational maps to help students to see this information on the piece of paper more clearly as it is you see it's framed in its boxes. Okay. Some students have trouble keeping up with which line of text they are reading on, and they may skip lines. So, using an item to guide them to help them to keep up with that tracking as they are reading may be beneficial. And you see on here on this particular slide, we also have they can use this item that they're tracking with to also track inside the colored piece of this turquoise ruler. And some of my dyslexic students would say, it just helps me to keep up with where I am using the color. So research doesn't necessarily support that a color will help a dyslexic student to be able to read better. However, some students really will voice that the color just helps them with their tracking and staying up with their place, or maybe even, blocking out some of the glare on the page to help them. Okay, for language arts, we need to give visual pictures for commonly reversed or flipped letters, such as B and D or P and Q. So just think about those letters that can be easily flipped or confused, and give those visuals to students. Have those available in the room so that they can refer to those. Okay, some additional practical strategies. We mentioned organization. Make sure that we use folders and dividers for different, maybe different subject areas, or you may have your math folder divided into different sections according to some sub areas. So it's important to help them to stay organized. Write down exactly what is required. We talked about keeping copying to a minimum. So I used to have my students, if they had trouble copying, I would say, well, can you try to start writing the assignment for homework tonight? And if you're having trouble, I'll write it for you. You can read it, I'll scribe, or vice versa. Just however I could help them to get that homework assignment written correctly. Because if I only said, hey, go write your homework in your planner, they may get home and mom or dad may look at that planner and think, I don't understand what we're supposed to be working on tonight. And then by that time, the student has also forgotten and says, I'm not real sure what I wrote down here either. So that's kind of a frustration thing that we can help to avoid. Ensure the appropriate worksheets or books are with the student to take home. I've had students before who, I would provide an additional copy of a book so that that student could keep one at home, because I knew that that particular student may not get that book packed on that day. Encourage a daily routine. Students really thrive with routines and procedures in place. And look, I get to the last bullet. We can provide a set of textbooks, just like I could provide that. I provided sometimes a chapter book. I could also send home extra textbooks sometimes, so that we didn't have that, get home and don't have what you need for homework. For math, using manipulatives is really important, so they can have that tactile experience. They can feel, they can move things. So whenever possible, telling time. Oh, I can tell you as a former third grade teacher, telling time. Have those clocks, use those manipulatives, use different types of clocks so that they can get used to the different ones. Money is very important to use manipulatives. With fractions, have them holding different pieces of things. Manipulatives are wonderful. All right, for spelling, count the number of sounds in a word and then correlate the sounds with the letters. This is really important. For example, and we have some illustrations on here that are fairly simple as far as three-letter words, but when you get in your upper grades, when you're working with your upper grade students, and you're teaching that EA can also say then sound counting there, and having them write the EA in one blank, or having a manipulative to represent the EA, for example. So that's a little higher level than your early elementary students who are doing, for example, the CVC words. So that strategy of sound counting can carry out to the older grades too. It just becomes a little more difficult at the older age groups, but it's a great strategy with those older kids with encoding. Explicitly teach phonics rules and review them multiple times, constantly spiraling back to review those phonics rules. Group words into word families with multiple patterns. That's a great way, practicing for spelling tests for the week. Grouping them into their word families, or you can group them into similar phonetic sounds and then discuss the different spelling patterns for each phonetic sound. All right, some writing strategies. Brainstorming prior to writing is a great idea. Also, guys, recording that brainstorming is a great idea too, because sometimes they'll have great ideas for writing. And then once they try to get that pencil to paper, or if they're typing their response and get those fingers to the keys, they've lost the story. You know, it was a great idea, but somehow it's left. So having them to record, or, you know, to make notes, brainstorming notes on some type of web or map, such as those maps, those organizational maps that we discussed a few minutes ago. Grouping nouns, verbs, and adjectives together to ensure students are using a variety of words. Y'all, color coding as they're writing. I've had my students before to use a certain color when they use a noun in their writing, so we could look at the different nouns that they used. Because, you know, you try to teach the student to use a variety of words, and sometimes they'll use the same word over and over. For example, she. She will be the beginning of every sentence. So, you know, having them write she in a particular color, and then counting, you know, how many times have we used this? Do we need to use another word in place of she so that we have a variety? Emphasize the need to write in stages rather than just trying to complete a long narrative at one time. That can help with the level of frustration there. Some handwriting strategies. Encourage them to study their handwriting to see, you know, where do I need to practice? What are the letters that I'm having the most trouble with? Discuss the advantages of having good handwriting. Sometimes it really helps our students if they use a larger pen, a pen, which this one's not on here, but a pen with a particular size. Ballpoint pen, for example, the tip, you know, you can get your fine tip, your medium tip. Um, some kids really did better with the gel type pens, rather than your standard ink pen, writing on a raised surface, writing on a chalkboard where you have that resistance. Some kids could do better on those dry erase type boards, where some kids found that the ease of that marker on that dry erase board didn't help their ability to write neatly. So, you know, try to figure out what's the medium that helps them to write neater and help them to use that medium when they can. A cursive jointed style is what we prefer for students with dyslexia, although I have had students with dyslexia who would learn cursive, but then would just default back to print because they preferred print. But helping them to practice that cursive and become more automatic with it will help them feel more comfortable using cursive. Okay, some at-home strategies, of course, for mom or dad or grandma, whoever the student is living with their family member. They can encourage cursive writing, practicing spelling procedures at home, having good oral communication. I always tell my parents, even gosh, when I was just a classroom or a school interventionist, telling parents, you know, as you're driving down the road, have that great oral communication about what you see, what signs you see, what colors things are, just utilizing that time that you might be taking brother or sister to gymnastics or baseball to work with your student with that oral communication. Play games with children. This will open up lines of communication and also building self-esteem and just practicing. And more practice is great, but also knowing when you've got to that level of frustration in which you stop the practice, because once you've reached frustration, you're not really getting anywhere anyway. So as much practice as you can without reaching that frustration level.
Okay, so several times when Jada was speaking, she talked about manipulatives, especially in that math. So I'm going to go over some common ones that we have in the classroom that we use a lot. So if you'll see here, like this is an example of where you can use these pipe cleaners to help spell the alphabet. Students can, you know, then move around those letters to build words and things like that. Anything that they can move and kind of manipulate with their hands is going to be a great resource. So this is sand, and it's using, you know, that pencil to draw that word in the sand, really get a different texture, a different feeling. Jada talked about the resistance of different pens and paper and boards and things like that. This is just another example of that. And, you know, our students with dyslexia really, they need that textile modality. And so this is just another good example of what you can use in your classroom. So this was in another example too. It's a blocks, And it really shows how a word can come apart, and then we can put a suffix and build a different word. It's really teaching our students that they can chunk, and then, move things around and take that E off, and teaching how that suffix goes at the end of a word. So these are some fun apps or digital things that we can do with our students. Really works on those reversals for dyslexia, overcoming, those types of things. It's got that Orton Gillingham card deck on your phone or on your iPad, whatever you do have in the classroom. So this is a fun quote that actually our technology specialist found for us, that yes, there are some great digital resources out there, and yes, we have lots of students who are now in that digital world or that virtual learning, but we need to remember as teachers and as parents, and encourage our parents, for those of us that are not parents, that there is no app to replace your lap. We've got to be reading to our kids. We've got to be reading to them daily. Having them pick a book and crawl up in your lap or in your reading centers, really getting them into the text, there's nothing that's going to replace that good time. So here is another fun strategy. Actually, y'all, I use this a lot with my personal children. They love the hanger and the clothespins because they can really slide and move them around and make different sentences. We use it a lot for our spelling words, whenever, especially we're doing word families and switching them out. It helps with those fine motor skills because, like we've talked about, the handwriting can be a big factor in like some difficulty, and so this particular hands-on activity can really help with that finger grasp too. So this Play-Doh, y'all, for some reason kids love Play-Doh. It is the vein of my existence, and I have outlawed it at my house currently. But my kindergartner in particular loves Play-Doh at school. They have really played with it the last couple weeks. It's something, again, about that textile and forming those letters and being able to make like a capital letter next to that lowercase letter and really learn and compare what they do look like.
Okay, so just to wrap up here, thinking about students that are taking the screener, taking that dyslexia screener in kindergarten and first grade. So we're going to go over the components of the screener and ways that you can support those students if they failed a certain component. So I'm going to jump straight to some strategies. So for the phonological awareness and phonemic awareness section, a key part of that is onset and rhyme. So one thing that you can do is give the child a word like cat and tell them, give me a word that rhymes with cat. And the thing to remember about phonological awareness is it's all auditory and it's all oral. So they're not having to read anything. It's all just that communication piece. So if I say, give me a word that rhymes with cat, and they tell me bat, well, that's great. That's perfect. But then see if they can give you another word, because what we find with our dyslexic students is they'll find a sound that they like and they'll use it in everything. So if I say, give me a word that rhymes with dog, and they'll say bog. Give me a word that rhymes with dad, and they'll say bad. They'll just use that same sound. So for them to really master that skill, see if they can give you a couple of words in that list. And so like you see here, we've got bat, hat, and rat. So see if they can give you 2 or 3 words. And that may be something they have to build up to. Another thing is just breaking down speech sounds. So if I give them a word like smart, tell me the sounds that you hear in smart. S, m, r, t. Okay, and then that is just more practice for them. Like I said, they're not reading it, they're not writing it down. It's all auditory. Another activity is saying which word does not begin with the sound. And so once again, you would say them: hat, hair, wind, house. And then they would tell you wind. and then isolating and pronouncing separate speech sounds. So tell me, what's the last sound you hear in the word rich? And they would say ch. Okay, so just some activities you can do. Here is another one I mentioned. Say the sounds in crash and have them just break it down. K, r, a, sh. And then once they have a good handle on that, then you can start manipulating sounds. So like you see here, if I have the word fish, okay, well now say fish without f. What's the word? And they would tell you ish. And then, okay, I have the word rake. Take out r and add l. What's the new word? Lake. So it's progressively getting harder. And so it may be one of those things that you have to step them up into that. Another part of the screener is the sound symbol recognition. So just seeing if the student can identify letters. And so this is a way that you can just practice. You don't have to give them all 26 letters on a page. You can give them maybe 4 or 6 letters and just let them practice telling you the letter names and practice telling you the letter sounds. Okay, so that's 2 components. One is the alphabet knowledge. Can they identify the letters? And can they generate the sounds? So you're really practicing 2 separate things there. Okay, so decoding, that's just our process of translating print into speech, recognizing our sound symbol correspondence. And a way you can practice this is with nonsense words. And this is something that we recommend because many of our students have memorized words. So when you give them a nonsense word, they're really having to decode those sounds. So if I look at a word like P-O-N, in my mind, I'm having to go pon. Okay, so they may not do that out loud. They may just kind of do it in their mind, but then they should be able to generate those words. And so you'll be able to tell pretty quickly if they're struggling with their decoding. The next component is encoding, and that's spelling. And so with this part, you're having them practice spelling different words. And like Jada said, you know, we like to teach in word families and we like to teach in rules. So we may teach a spelling rule and then give them a list of words that fit into that rule and have them practice that. That's just a way that you can practice their spelling. Rapid naming is a strategy that I have always loved teaching and working with. This really is an indicator for students with their processing speed. And you would think, you know, what does having a child say their color names, what does that have to do with reading? So that just helps them build up that skill. So if I can name colors rapidly, that is going to transfer over into how I'm able to pull words rapidly. It's all connected. And so one strategy you can use is with colors. You can also do different types of balls. So it can be basketball, baseball, tennis ball. It can be different types of utensils, fork, spoon, knife, and you have it on a page just like this. And they're just having to name them correctly. It's all about the processing speed and how we can increase that for our students and help them become more fluent readers. So those are the components of the screeners. Those are some tips that you can use if you're working with students that are struggling in any of those specific areas. Here are our email addresses. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Thank you.